Welcome to the Early Stage Startup. Today I'm interviewing my brother, Philip Tannor, CEO at DeepChecks, where they do LLM evaluation. We talk about building a content engine for evergreen assets and leveraging freelancing so you can scale quickly. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Philip, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thank you so much.
Philip, we'd love to hear a little bit about you and DeepChecks.
All right. So I'm Philip Tannor. At DeepChecks, what we're doing is we're doing what we call continuous evaluation of AI and LLMs. So we don't build like machine learning. We're not the end user machine learning. We come to a company that has machine learning AI based systems, and then we come and evaluate it. Most of our focus in the last, I'd say, year or so is on large language models. So things that are, GPT-4 style, but we have done quite a lot of open source before the LLM revolution on, data, computer vision, and then of course, natural language processing. So at DeepChecks, basically it's in the category of MLOps or LLMOps. And the idea is to give confidence to a company that's building it. My role there is a co-founder and CEO. So we've been, working together as DeepChecks for 4.5 years, and definitely learned a lot there.
All right, cool. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your journey and starting DeepChecks?
Definitely. So basically, I'll say most of my background comes from the Israeli Defense Forces, or my background prior to DeepChecks. So it was really interesting. There was at the beginning of the kind of consulting roles that we did, probability and statistics, after getting a bachelor's in physics and math. Then as I was doing, my master's and working in these kind of, let's call it operations research roles, then I discovered the world of AI. So there was like a different kind of center of excellence place that was showing how to do pretty amazing things with something that was then called random forest that no one heard of. Then since then it's become a lot more famous. And that kind of attracted me into this world of what was then called machine learning. And today everyone uses the word AI for it. So I started being pretty technical. I think I always had the passion for getting things to move and making things happen. Even though I was in the technological context, I did do, some sort of innovation work also within the larger, more complex systems that were in front of me. So I think I kind of realized at some point that at some point I'm going to be founding a company. When we were looking what to found, and we just worked on solving one of our pain points. Me and my co-founder Sheila, from the same area, within the Israeli Defense Forces, and we met in the Talpiyot program. So we did ideation together, and this was something that we both experienced as a pain. There was no way to make sure that these AI systems are doing what they should be doing. So there was that initial journey, which was towards founding a company. And then we had, towards reaching out to the developer and getting to the point where we're focusing a lot of our efforts on open source. I think there was the whole extra learning.
I see. Well, it seems that you've gone through quite the journey, and you all both individually and together. And I really think it's the greatest way to start a startup. When you have that pain on your own, you already know the audience, you've been there yourself, it hurts you, and you go out and research and see how you can solve that pain, compared to, hey, I just want to start a startup, let's start researching around the market and see what happens. So I really like the drive over there. So I know it seems to me like you're well known in the Israeli ecosystem. You're doing a lot of really great things. What would you say is your forte or things that you feel like you're doing pretty well at DeepChecks? I know that you have talked to me a few times about content and growth in SEO and your specialty on working with freelancers. How about if you can share a little bit about that with us?
So first of all, I like to joke about myself that I transitioned from machine learning to AI. I can't really use that joke anymore now that people use AI for regular stuff, for like actual hands-on things. But I think a lot of amazing work at DeepChecks is being done within R&D, all right? But I'll put that aside just because that's not what I do most of the time. So I think within DeepChecks, I think there are a few interesting things that we did that are somehow related to the go-to-market. And I think definitely a big part of that has to do with the world of marketing or the world of getting people to kind of hear your message. So I think definitely there's always the tough part of understanding what you're positioning, who you're reaching out to, and so forth. But even once you've done that, I think there's a lot of legwork. They're just if you just will open Notion or something and write down all the different actions you can do to get your ICP to hear about what you're doing, you can really fill up pages and pages and pages. And then it's just, I really feel there are some startups or some cultures where you kind of pick one and then do it for a year and then think about the next one. And I think something that is pretty strong in our kind of DNA at DeepChecks is we say, no, we won't take the ones that are very expensive, but for the ones that just don't cost a lot of money and it's just, legwork, well, let's do a lot of them at once. So I think we do that a lot. So I can definitely talk a bit about things that we're doing for, getting more website traffic, for having more events, for having more collaborations, for open source. So I think there are a few different areas we can touch. But yeah, I think the secret is to start early and then to keep doing it. I think it's very easy to take a break and to say, yeah, you know what? I don't know if this is the focus. We might make a big change, but some of these things take a long time. So if I have a year and a half to invest until I get to point X, then you need to start before you know exactly what you'll need.
I see. So it sounds to me like you have a little bit of an experimentation approach. And I know that consistency is key, but I think what a lot of folks aren't sure about is how do you know when to keep going and when to say, you know what, this effort is just not working? Do you have any milestones that you set up?
Definitely. So I think no matter what I'll say, there's always the important way of deciding of common sense. But if I take a step back for a second, I think you do want to kind of split in the world of go-to-market marketing and so forth of, let's call it, evergreen assets and then kind of fading assets. All right. So let me just say, product count, it does help to some extent in the long run, but it's pretty much you do it, you get some benefit that's right now, and then it disappears. Right. But if you write a blog, then it continues for a long time. So my intuition is if you have some idea of what your evergreen assets might look like very early on, and you find a cost-effective way of building them, then I would not treat that as an experiment. So, I mean, we do have the separation within DeepChecks where we look at things like, okay, what's an initial experiment? What needs to be done 80%? And then what 80% perfection, and what needs to be done 95% perfection. So my intuition is that everything is related to content, SEO, and so forth. It's really important to find the stuff that aren't an experiment and that you just know that you can kind of theoretically give to if you would have, a magic wand that would create a robot for you that would continue to do something for a year and a half, then you wouldn't say, no, you know what? I don't know what we'll be doing in a year and a half. So there are some areas I can say specifically what, I think blogs are like that. The glossary in your website is like that. Being referenced by different places on the internet is like that. So if you completely change your user, if you start off by selling to a developer, you end up selling to, I don't know, truck drivers, then it might not help you at all. But if you're in the same area, there's a very high chance that it's gonna help you in any case. When you build it, then you just have to expand it. Now, what are things that are experiments, right? So of course, anything, so I can think a webinar, let's say, is a combination, right? Because if you have more and more successful webinars, then it can be the same audience, you can grow the group, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of evergreen, right? The people that want to come to all your events. But then some aspects of the webinar, which are the new people that came here to listen to this topic, you kind of lost them a bit. So if you don't have any product and you don't have enough to create a discussion, then maybe webinars are a little less cost effective than starting off with things related to SEO. So I think, and then things that are 100% an experiment, that would be let's just imagine that you had a technique of going and commenting on the top. You'd find a way of tracking what are the most relevant posts that come out on Twitter, and then, or tweets or posts, and then you would come and comment on them right then, and then in real time get something happen. So that type of thing, I would see a lot more as an experiment. It might work, it might not work. It's good to learn what works, but it's not an evergreen asset.
And if I can contradict you here, I do agree on the posts themselves that they tend to be less evergreen than blog posts. But if you look at building an audience, that is an evergreen asset. Would you agree?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I'm not even talking about your own post. Talking just about like comments to, if you know that Andrzej Karpathy is someone from MySpace is going to get a lot of traffic, and then you want a lot of people to reach out to you so that you find something kind of provocative. So that's usually not going to get a lot of people to follow the commenter, just maybe to look at them for a bit. So, and maybe there might be a link there, right? But building an audience on social, that's definitely evergreen. That's why you might see some people that before they kind of know what their startup's going to do, or before they even know that they're going to have a startup, they might have like, pictures of them, with the beach behind them or things like that, like holding up a book and smiling. So just getting people to follow them. And I think that's great. Like followers on social is a great evergreen asset.
Cool. I like that. So you mentioned SEO for growth content. I'm curious to hear a little bit about your journey there, like your overall strategy, what was not working, what was working better. And also, of course, if you're comfortable, if you could share any of the results so that other founders could learn from this journey of yours.
Yeah, all right. So I think I'll dive into a bit of it. So first of all, very early on, we did nothing, right? We had those, landing pages kind of where, everyone thinks they're kind of creative and you do some sort of cool animation or whatever. It doesn't really help with anything, right? Like after you see what website traffic looks like, and then you just kind of see the difference. You're like, okay, those numbers weren't material. It didn't really mean anything. And also people put like, subscribe here to hear about our updates, right? That's like, it's just negligible compared to the things that you'll do later on. But then so we got a marketing consultant that we started working with at some point early on, and SEO seemed very expensive to us. Like, what are we going to do that for? And then he's like, okay, you're going to be paying for blogs, right? You're going to be writing blogs on your own and so forth. So, I mean, if you would just get advice about what are the exact terms that are being used on Google, and then being able to put them both in the title, but then also in a few different places in the blog, that would make a big difference, right? Like imagine it would be 2 times or 3 times the difference with the same resources or the same writing resources. That, wouldn't you want to make that better? And it took him a long time to convince me, but then like looking back, I'm like, I'm really glad I caved in, because I think having, a plan really, really helps. So I think, at least for me, there was always the dilemma between content, like the quality of the content, and then just how much website traffic are you getting, right? Because theoretically, you could do very low quality stuff and then bring, a lot more people. Like, I'm not saying it would work, there's a lot of voodoo that has to do with how the search engines work, but I could imagine something like that where everything is low quality. And at the beginning, I would write like everything myself, either me or someone else from the core team, which really, really didn't scale. A lot of times it'd be waiting for me. At some point, we got moved over to having me have to review every little thing. At some point, you kind of have to find smart ways to delegate and have a systematic way of reviewing, but also to go to freelancers or, just let's call it, non-core R&D team members that are doing a lot of the writing. So at some point, we did separate between the glossary and then things like questions and answers, all sorts of assets like that are on the website, and then the blogs. So the blogs are still, to date, they're higher quality. They might not be like the exact same thing as if someone, the core engineer that created the system would, create the edge cases in code and then put them out kind of for the core part of the blog. But it's still supposed to be something where we have a well-defined ICP. We have like a couple of LinkedIn's that anyone writing knows that this person is supposed to be interested in. And we have all sorts of guidelines, like how much of it's supposed to be graph code, things like that, and not just text. And then, when we review, we'll kind of enforce that, so that it should feel like a good, coherent post for someone that's reading it. So anyway, the combination of these together, we got to the point where we have about a blog every week, and, things like the glossary and questions and answers. We just have hundreds and hundreds of, of values on the website. And it is, without saying the exact numbers, it is in the tens of thousands of, organic visitors to our website, where with what's really cool is we could have had times where we were getting a lot of website and we couldn't see the benefit of it. And then all of a sudden you say, you know what, we have enough new features. Let's kind of reposition ourselves in the space. And then you can change messages, you can change the messaging, change whatever the CPA is, and then boom, it's like you're getting twice as many inbound leads than you were getting before that. And then you don't have to like increase the website traffic. You already have it because it's an evergreen asset, or it's based on evergreen assets. So anyway, I think that it's interesting, and I think something else is interesting is that we're managing to do this where I'm not so involved. Like it's very different than when I kind of felt I have to review every little thing, and I think the quality is also something I'm pretty much okay with.
Okay, it sounds like I do agree with that point about evergreen assets. I like that a lot, and I also like the part about having that content out there, building that audience, and even if you have to make a pivot, you still built up something top of funnel. So you keep getting those tens of thousands of users that you still have that conversion as well, compared to building things that are more specific and then realizing, wait, this doesn't attach to the product that we want to pivot to. So we have to start from scratch. So I like that a lot. I also like the hands-off approach and building a systematic approach to getting that content machine to do the work for you without having to be, half of your job on top of the content. So yeah, I think the next point, you started to mention freelancers. I'd love to hear a little bit about your approach over there, perhaps finding, collaborating, making things work even when they're not fully in the house.
Okay, so this is a really, really, really interesting point. At the beginning, I think when we founded the company, it was kind of like anyone that's not in the room with me now is not relevant. There's going to be like, miscommunications and you don't know if they're really working the way they should be doing, and there's no like ping pong and so forth. But then at some point I kind of realized, okay, I mean, this really doesn't scale. Like it could take months to hire someone, and then you like hire them, and then someone else comes and so forth. And then what if all of a sudden I say, no, I want to double down on this field, and then like have twice as much. So I really, really got like to the 180 degrees to the other side. Like today, I would say almost the opposite. I'm like, you have to decide what a core team member needs to do, and then you have to like the skill of a good manager. I don't know, maybe there are good managers who don't do it. Let's follow the great manager, I think, is to be able to compartmentalize, to put into compartments jobs that can be kind of sent out with, good luck. So, it doesn't mean that you don't have to review it, but I think that managing freelancers or managing folks that aren't part of your core team is harder, but it's a much better way to scale. It's more cost effective, and you can work with people that are in any country in the world. Okay, so let's say you want to look for someone that can write about, how, Kafka and alternatives to Kafka. All right, I'm just giving you an example. So if you would have to search like within your building, then it's like no one, right? If you have to search within your neighborhood, then there's that. If you can search anywhere in the world, of course, it's like faster time to resolving, et cetera, et cetera. So theoretically, the idea is you have a much larger pool of people. Once you have a much larger pool of people, there's also like some sort of distribution of how much they charge per hour or per whatever they do, per project of the same type. And of course, there's also some sort of variance with quality. So the theory with this is that once you do enough research and interview enough folks, you can find someone where for their location in the world, it could be very, good for them. And then you could also get high quality for not the exact same price that you might pay if you're, in an expensive place like the Bay Area, which I think is the most common, but also in the recent years, at least like Tel Aviv. So that's a bit of the theory. It's a lot harder than it sounds. Why is it a lot harder than it sounds? How do you know if someone's good? Like they have to be good in a few different aspects, right? They have to be like, they have to have the talent, they have to have the integrity, they have to have, their heart has to be in the right place. They have to be able to meet deadlines. And a lot of these just don't really work well with like the interview process, with the classic interview process. So I think there are a few different methods for how to do this, for how to interview these, for how to find who the right ones are. But the idea is once you find those that you trust and you have good chemistry with and you can work with, then you can kind of run with them for years. And then all of a sudden, everything is kind of working a lot better. or given the same budget and given the same type of attention span and so forth, if you find the right people that are working with you, then it's a huge win-win, right? Because there could be someone that's being paid like a lot more than the typical salary in their area, while you're getting something that's for a lower rate in the area that you exist in. And then to me, it doesn't translate to paying less. It translates to more blogs for the same budget. Like if the budget's fixed, and it's the same thing. If you're trying to be aggressive, this is a way to be aggressive without doing things that just don't make sense when you have a general kind of startup budget. So, okay, so what does an interview process look like? So I think there are different ways to do it, but my intuition is we say, okay, it's not as legally binding as having a regular employee. Just think of a bite-sized project, and then you might have an initial interview, like one interview, maybe two. In the case of the bite size is a pretty large bite, but that same bite-sized project, theoretically, you could give it to 2 or 3 in the same field. Like we had a case where we were looking for a designer for a specific type of project, and then we knew kind of like what we want something to look like. We said, here, designing the homepage, that's a great bite-sized project. Let's see if this is someone you want to work with, and you learn all these things about them. You can give it to the same exact project, like the same Word doc or the same Google doc. You can send it out to 3 freelancers and just work with them a bit. And you can be transparent about it. You can say this is the first step. We're reviewing. We're working with a few. And some of the time at the end, when there were more than one that were excellent, we ended up working with more than one of them. And what does happen is some of the time something comes up in their life, right? Like just like I don't feel like, well, at least at the beginning, like it's the exact same thing as hiring someone, where you say, hey, welcome, here's your computer, here's your, this is how you're going to get, things done, here's your body and so forth. So they also they also might have another project they were waiting with and they don't know, like they can disappear. It happens a lot. So you want to always have enough freelancers with a large enough relationship, with a good enough relationship with enough of them, so that you'll always get what you need to be done on time. So that might mean that, let's say for blogs, you might want to write more blogs than you need for every week, and then you don't have to finish it right before. You might have a backlog and then just wait until they're published. And for creating a website or something like that, you might need a bit more of a buffer. And I think there are a lot of things that you have to do that are differently, and that's why I mentioned it's a bit harder than managing people that sit in the same office. But when you master it, I think that's really a way to get to scale. And you theoretically can find people that are a lot better than the ones that may be able to come, 4 days a week to your office and happen to not have been reached out to by the companies in your same building, et cetera, et cetera.
So it sounds, just to recap, you mentioned a lot of interesting points here. Ideally, or theoretically, what would happen is, if I only have my city to look for people to work with, I'm very limited, right? But if I can go at a global scale, suddenly I have a lot of options, different pricing options, different talents that I may not have in my country or in my city. So now I have a lot of options. But with that freedom, or with all of those options, just like e-commerce, when you want to buy something, suddenly you have to check the reviews. You have lots of data points. You're not sure who to work with. Because it's so free and open, people also tend to drop off more. There's less commitment. So we need some form of interview process and a good way to make sure that we're working with the right people. Plus, we want to, over time, build relationships and build up a team of freelancers so that we can get good work done over time. Are there any pros or cons for working with freelancers in your eyes? Like, when would you bring in someone full-time compared to just going freelance with everyone?
So I think that anything in any field where long-term knowledge is really important, then I think it's always important. But when it's more important, then I think it's much better to have a core team member. So I didn't experiment with having an R&D organization where you say, I only hire tech leads here, all right? I have 5 tech leads under me, and then each one of them can work with developers all around the world. I never tried that. I'm not sure if it would work well or not, but I think in a lot of the areas related to go-to-market, then it's pretty easy to see. So relationships with customers, let's say, or with partners, that I think is really important that it's in-house, right? Like you can also see that happening, right? Like in the field of being an SDR or BDR, and it's usually the first call and you pass it on to an account executive or a founder or a VP. So the SDRs, you do see like outsourcing companies that do that. But then like outsourcing companies that are doing like, okay, I'm going to be managing the relationship. I'm going to be the customer success or account owner over time. You don't see that a lot, right? And then I think it's similar like in what we're talking about it. So theoretically, if you have someone that's like managing which blog post goes when and who do I reach out to and who are the different contacts. So that's the type of person you would want like to be the same person over time. And then, it could be working with someone that's technically a freelancer, but you don't, the churn there is painful. The ramp up time is higher. And then let's say I'm giving an example. So writing content, writing a glossary, managing your social, things like that. Those are things where it's really important to have amazing people, but you do see examples of amazing people that are managing to do that for a few different companies at once. So for that,
Cool. So it seems like you have a time-based approach or similar to the assets, right? If the person goes hand in hand with what they're producing and you need that connection to be there continuously, then it's probably not going to be a freelancer, right? And you don't suddenly want to drop off of someone who, is actually part of something that's part of the company. For example, a product manager, right? You want to hold their hand. You want them to be part of the team. You can't have them drop off in a month because then it's going to be a really long ramp up process to bring in someone else. Are there any other criteria, or would that be the main thing?
To me, I think that's the main thing. I think there are always exceptions, though. There are always exceptions. There could be an amazing freelancer that just gets anything done in no time, and then they're like, I wasn't planning to, but then they happen to be amazing. Like, I think anything can happen. And again, of course, there are a lot of full-time employees that aren't as good as you might have thought at the beginning. So even like, if ideally it sounds like they would be better than some other freelancer approach, then it might be destined. But I think both with freelancers and with full-time employees, and I think you really, before you've met enough or worked with enough, that you don't really know if you're on the right path now. Like you might think that what you have is okay, and then you might see a friend's company where it seems a lot better, and then you're like, oh wow, I want that too, right? And it could be the opposite, where you happen to be on a gold mine, or you don't realize that your SDR is just a lot better than anyone else's, and you didn't even notice that until you kind of try to find a second SDR and saw that nothing comes close. So
makes sense. I think also the benefits. I don't know how long Upwork and Fiverr have been around, or other way, or this global and easy way of working with freelancers has existed, but it really allows startups and businesses to get that domain knowledge that they need really quickly, ramp up really quickly, and move fast and cheap when needed. So I think this is something that's really cool, that allows people to build really cool things at prices and at value that didn't previously exist. So being able to do this with freelancers is definitely one of the top skills, I would say. And it looks like you're doing a great job with that by what you've told me in different stories and whatnot. So I think another topic I'd love to cover with you, because I also heard a lot and I think you're pretty good at social and whatnot, has to do with launches, right? So product launches, you mentioned the product hunt. Can you just give me a little overview on how you approach this? And just let's start with the high level.
Okay, so from a very, very high level point of view, it really depends on the different type of approach you want to select. It's like a strategy, right? I think there are products that just like to show we're always the best, and we can, there's a new update, we like to add it. I dealt a lot with the product around our open source launches, with thinking about the product quality and what you are or aren't giving, et cetera, et cetera. So at least for back then, I saw there were companies that said, okay, we'll release the open source as soon as something's ready, and then we'll keep adding it, and the community will understand. And then I think there's the other approach, which I think like the most well-known example for a company that does that or is kind of in that area is Apple, right? Where they try to have like every launch be like, secret, then boom, one day everyone heard about it. So I don't think it has to be like, being on a huge stage and like, that, and like in a very large and fancy event. But at DeepChecks, we chose the second approach, which is basically saying you're not necessarily going to be given another chance pretty soon. So even though we took the open source route for a lot of what we did, I think, we did have some criteria for release where we basically said, we're not going to release it unless, right? And which I think is the most important component. Like, we did a lot of tricks to get more people to hear about it and to see it. But I think it starts off by having either a rigid date or a rigid criteria. It could be both, right? It could be both of it's also a good way to get the team motivated towards the launch. But like theoretically, if you say, yeah, I'm taking this little, device we're building and I'm, going to be launched to space with it. I already coordinated with NASA on, June 21st, then things are going to converge and it's going to happen, right? So that is an approach to do. I don't think there are any generic recommendations, but I think in more cases than not, I think it is a good approach to kind of say, I only want to release it once it has the effect I want it to have. So in our case, we would ask the earlier beta users of the open source, kind of that used it before the release, questions that are more product related, like as is, here's the link, I'm not giving you any explanation. Would you use it? And would you recommend it to a friend? And then we had like a certain criteria, we said basically a certain percentage of the people have to say, yes, I would, and yes, I would pass it to a friend. Could be a different number for each of them. But it's some, and even if you mess up, and even if you don't go with the exact number that you set up in advance, it's something. It's something that'll hold you back if you're not anywhere near there. And we discovered pretty interesting things about that. Like most of what we had to do was improving the docs, or improving the README, and making it very accessible for like copy pasting. Like that was a really interesting insight. Like you want to have influencers be able to do to do a print screen to the images in your GitHub, and they'll just put it online. So in each vertical, I think it's a bit different, but I think there's a lot of prep work to be done. Now, after that prep work, I think like you can either set a date or set like a week or a month and then set up events. So what is there out there? There's Product Hunt, Hacker News, LinkedIn, Twitter. There's also doing things that are within the website, but then I'll just get a lot of people to talk about like a significant discount or something provocative with the way you release it. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. But I think more important than any of them is the release criteria. The release criteria and actually experimenting with it in a setting that represents exactly what's going to happen after the release.
Got it. And when it comes, in your eyes, to the benefits of these launches, like we were talking about Evergreen earlier, right? This is the flip side of the coin. You could put in a lot of effort into any bucket, right? So how do you see the benefit of launches? What kind of results can you get? Like earlier, you mentioned Product Hunts where you can get something really specific. Like people have talked about getting like traffic spikes, but then the next day it's all gone, or 90% of the audience wasn't relevant, right? So where's the balance here, and what are the pros and cons in your eyes over here?
So really important question. I think that anything related to a product launch is not an evergreen asset. Like this is all within the family of a quick boost towards getting something that's more maintainable. That's why it's so important to have the release criteria, in my opinion. Because if like 80% of the users would use the product and say it crashed, or it's crap, or it's just not, easy to use, or, I tried to compare it to a competitor and it's a slower version of X and there are memes about it, then you create a new bad evergreen asset of bad brand, right? I think there's the saying of there ain't no such thing as bad publicity. So I don't know if that's necessarily true in the startup or in archetypes of ecosystem, right? Like if you're famous for losing in a very public race, then I don't know if it's such a good idea. So
I'm imagining, sorry I'm cutting you off. I'm imagining, after this terrible PR, your brand goes to crap and then you're like, all right, let's pivot and let's embrace it. It's so good, it's bad, and you're changing a product.
Right. But what happens is to get like bad comments like that, that was a big thing for us. That we wanted, like we knew that if we were, publish it, let's say on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, and then we'd have a few people commenting. We said, if 1 out of 3 of the comments there is something negative about it, like how is this different than X, Y, and Z? It seems like the exact same thing. It doesn't have to be like such a terrible thing. It just has to be that from the GitHub, you don't necessarily understand the positioning enough, and then boom, people say, I don't see how this is different. If you see in the same thread 3 people asking, you don't see how this is different than X, which is similar, then it could hurt your brand. And I don't know if that extra pulse and users and new users during a launch is more important than maintaining the brand where a year later people are going to search for you kind of online. So I think that I do think that amazing launches can be part of your brand. Like I think there are quite a few companies when they did like an amazing product hunt and people know them kind of for that. And then I think that's, that on its own is part of the kind of branding asset. I think like Mine is a good example. Mine is a company that was also an Intel Ignite, the accelerator that we were also in. So I think they had quite a few like really cool videos and things like that, which you could say, okay, I don't know the direct contribution, but it does create that kind of asset where, years later, people might remember them by the video.
Makes sense. All right, so we covered product launches, we covered a bunch of other things. How about if we start to wrap up? What kind of advice would you give for other seed-shaped startup founders or bootstrappers that want to build the content machine and work well with freelancers and just get that initial growth?
So I have a few. One of them, I don't know if you kind of realized when I was talking about how to interview freelancers, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. That's something where I think the founder could be involved, but they shouldn't lead it. I mean, we're working, I mentioned, with a marketing consultant. Daniil, I know you're also in the field, but I think having someone that's working with you could be external to the team, could be internal to the team, but that, where that's a big part of what we're doing. If you're going to interview like 3 freelancers and take one, that's going to be like a very low quality team. So I think getting to the point where you're interviewing to some extent 10 or 15 and then trying with one and you end up, for the ones that you might have met dozens for the few that for the one that you're working with, and then you have one of those in each field. I think that's a big way to get it to work in the area that we're talking about with freelancers. I think that's one piece of advice. The second piece of advice is we mentioned kind of it earlier, but I'll say it again, is understanding which evergreen assets would be amazing for you and then doubling down on them even before you know what you need exactly. So if you're going to be reaching out to data engineers, then start writing things data engineers will read. It could be like, addressing the common bugs that they encounter. It could be comparing the tools that they're using, but you can start that way before you're at product market fit. And when you're at product market fit, if you start then, you'll be paying a lot to Google Ads and things like that. Where, I can run some numbers just here just to say this. When we looked at things that are comparable to like inbound leads that we're getting through their organic, it was like for the same cost per lead and so forth, it would have been like tens of thousands of dollars a month. And we also wouldn't want to slow down, and we wouldn't want to be only outbound because then you reach out to people at the wrong time, like in their journey. So there are different ways to build a company, but I think for companies that have at least some similarities to what we're doing, and I think starting early, working methodologically, having a blog every week, but also doing the lower quality things like the glossary, I think it's a pretty good and generic tip, and I would probably do it also in the next company I would found, unless it's like very, very different.
Nice. All right. So how can listeners get in touch with you, connect with you, learn more about DeepChecks? Where can they go?
So anything related to DeepChecks, I think the website is pretty good. Anything related to myself. So I think my LinkedIn is I'm pretty vocal on LinkedIn, so you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And also if any of you are working with Daniil, then you have also a separate channel for that. So anyway, I'm available.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you too.